Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and especially on this topic. For some of you who may have known me in past lives, you all know that I was actually here in Texas, in Austin. I used to be part of the Texas Natural Resource Conservation Commission. I still remember that back in the day. And the TMDL program was actually one of the areas that I had the opportunity to lead during the time that I was there. I've been at EPA, hard to believe now, some 12 years. But when I came to EPA, I certainly, having lived through the TMDL wars here in Texas, I certainly came in with a lot of perspectives and a lot of understanding of the challenges that were really facing states at the time. And when I got into the lab, and I met the researchers who were quite interested in maybe developing new tools and methods for helping us to target actions in these impaired waters due to fecal pollution, it did not take long for me to kind of support that. And many of you know Jorge Santo Domingo, and Dr. Santo Domingo, I actually really supported his hiring into the division, into the Water Supply and Water Resources Division, and I was quite thrilled. And I remember sitting down with him, and we discussed writing this State of the Science paper, and I know that paper got a lot of play, but that was on a conversation that we had one day. And later on, he really led the development of the MST guide document, and very carefully named guide document, not guidance document. That's the bureaucracy at work. Then we had the very good fortune to have Orrin Shanks, Dr. Shanks, join the team. And I'm just so thrilled about his progress and his just creativity and all of the energy he has brought to this particular field. I'm going to talk today about the relevance of these methods in the context of EPA policies, programs, and regulations. I'm going to try and stay away from all of the technical stuff that you've seen, which is a good thing since I'm not an expert in this, but rather to talk more about the regulatory context that we're operating in. Well, there it is. There it is. Okay. Well, for those of you who follow EPA and what we've been up to, many of you have an understanding that we are really trying to move our programs into more of a sustainability context. And, the thing about sustainability, it's really about how do you design systems to prevent, how do you have long-lasting utilization and beneficial use of resources, intergenerational, so future generations can actually have the choices that perhaps we have today as we look forward into that next phase. So I think when we talk about this particular area of science, really in the context of sustainability, we're really talking about how do we preserve these precious water resources and how do we manage them in a way at acceptable cost, at acceptable societal level to allow these future generations the flexibility to derive their benefits. And some would say that these sorts of things might indicate perhaps opportunities for advancing sustainability. And so when we have indications that our beaches are being closed, or concerns that might be raised through the land application of sludges and the like, that perhaps we can do better, and that it is an opportunity there to rethink these systems in a much broader and bigger way. All right, but here we get into the mundane, and we have that as the backdrop, but really understand that what we're dealing with here are very, very prescribed federal context, so federal laws that are in place. And in many ways, everything that goes on in the agency has to be consistent with that. After all, this is prescribed in how we should do environmental protection in the country. And so, to me, when you think about these methods, and a lot of them I understand they're in the research area still, but, you know, to mainstream them, we're really looking at very, very prescribed ways of doing things under the Federal Clean Water Act and the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. But MST, BST has a lot of relevance, I think, in meeting those overall goals there. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that, but I did want to go back to Don's earlier slides about how I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that, you know, in this endeavor, we are trying to have healthy people, to prevent illness, to preserve human life, and that there are still significant challenges to that as it relates to recreational and drinking waters. So I kind of did this scoring system on water quality standards and the relevance to BST, and 3 stars is as much as I went on, because I believe that BST, MST type methods can be quite important in the context of establishing water quality standards. I did want to say also that I know that there are a lot of questions about, is EPA going to promulgate regulations, going to promulgate actual standards for the way to conduct MST? And I can tell you that the agency is not on that track. I'll talk a little bit about the Beaches lawsuit, but there isn't anything that's coming about that's in the pipeline right now that we can say is going to codify MST in the way that we're talking about today. So I think that's an important message. But I do think that these methods and these technologies are quite important in many aspects of these federal regulatory exercises that we run through. I'm sure this group in particular is very well versed in what the Act requires, so there are very, very prescribed things. When we talk about water quality standards, there are legal standards that have to be met. They are prescribed here, not legal standards in terms of a limit necessarily, although that is the case, but it is very well fleshed out what these things have to include. So for water quality standards, you do have to have use designations, such as recreation, such as drinking water sources and the like. You do have to have criteria, and this is where the numbers come into play. So that's a very important part of this. And in the evolution of this water quality standards program, there's really been this mix of numeric or narrative type criteria. And the preponderance now is really trying to move toward numeric criteria. A lot of what I've been seeing is really saying use numbers, and develop numbers. And that's what is going on within the agency. And these numbers, of course, in the water quality standards context, do become the benchmark for monitoring requirements. So then, you know, it trips all of the monitoring requirements and how things are monitored and what you are looking at in terms of comparison, and that's where the criteria is. I won't talk about anti-degradation, that's too complicated an issue, but it's a required part of the standards setting process. We have all seen these diagrams as well that tell us about the actual profile of what we are assessing. When you look at national waters, you are only assessing 27%, in this case, of rivers and streams. So we've got a long way to go, and we still don't quite know the status, so to speak, of many of our water bodies. And then you move into whether those are in good shape or not, and then this also depicts that in a big way, that we've got a lot of work to do here. And again, in the context of that sustainability paradigm, you know, in a perfect world, we should have 100% assessment and 100%, you know, safety, so to speak, for all current and future uses. I did want to talk a bit about the Beaches lawsuit. Yep. And how many of you all have been following this? Maybe if I can get a show of some of this. This is an important activity that is going on in the agency at the moment as it relates to water quality standards. A while back, Congress saw fit to put in place an add-on to the requirements of the Clean Water Act, and it was to require EPA to develop new criteria for recreational waters, and so it's called the Beach Act. And the current way that we assess these waters, it's a very old kind of criteria that we set up in 1986. So it is quite dated, and Congress came in and asked EPA to revisit this particular criteria. And what can I tell you? We were late. So Congress prescribed very specific timeframes for doing this work, and we sort of missed it. So as a result, some folks at NRDC and a few other organizations were not pleased with that sort of thing and actually sued the agency and won. And during the course of that lawsuit, a consent decree was put in place that required a number of studies in order to be able to establish and review the current way we look at criteria for recreational waters. And the reason that I wanted to really talk about this a bit more perhaps than other things is because in the consent decree itself and the settlement agreement, you know, the EPA did say that we're going to develop, refine, validate, and publish one more new ambient test method and review those wastewater test methods that might be relevant in that context. There are a number of other requirements and studies that are part of this overall effort. But I think interestingly, for the first time in this particular settlement agreement, EPA was to continue to conduct research currently underway to identify genetic sequences that could form the basis of chicken and seagull specific fecal source assays. And if we do find them, that it can develop, then we would go ahead and move forward with that. As it turns out, we made a determination in this promulgation process that we were not in a position to be able to support that sort of thing at the moment, but I think it's pretty significant that within the scope of this particular lawsuit that we actually looked at microbial source tracking, although we took a pass because we didn't think that the methods were the new standard setting, the criteria process is underway as I speak. There has been a very, very extensive public engagement type of set of activities that's been going on. The recommendation is going to still be for culture methods for enterococci and E. coli in freshwaters and enterococci in marine waters. But there is, in the current thinking, also kind of the opening of a door. I think that's pretty relevant in this particular case, and that is the site-specific criteria derivation and the support for QMRA type of activities along with the sanitary surveys. So it does, in some ways, begin to open the door on these kind of techniques. But again, it doesn't look like this is going to be codified into any criteria for recreational waters in this year. So this will be finalized before the end of the year according to the settlement agreement. But I think it does have a significant basis for this and the need to continue to look at these methods going forward, albeit not in a regulatory context at the moment. TMDLs, I know this is the big one, and really from my experience base where MSDS can have an enormous impact. And I was very happy to hear that said that there's nothing like best professional judgment or obvious sources of pollution that may not need this sort of level of analysis. But there are complex watersheds, we all know that, and that is where I think these methods can become very, very, very significant and useful in protecting human health. All have seen these as well, the numbers and the by use category of impairments. And we have a lot of challenges here. No one's skirting this. And where these methods can be useful and helpful, I think they need to be applied, albeit not in every case, and especially in those where that pollution source is obvious. With regard to the causes of impairments for pathogens, so when we say pathogen cause, there's a lot of analysis that the states do with regard to this. This is what we're looking at, and I think the most important thing is that when you look at the causes, I mean, that's really driven by the analytical methods that are available and are in use. So I think that here, paying attention to what analytical methods are approved by EPA become very, very important, because those are going to be the ones that are going to be used. There's no question about it, and I'll talk a little bit more. Another area that I did want to bring up is this issue of biosolids management, because to me, this is one of those areas where the agency spends a lot of time determining, is it Class A, is it Class B sludge? Can it be applied at what rate? Are people threatened by this sort of thing? And again, I think there is relevance there for these kinds of methodologies. And there are methods, of course, that have been put in place for these particular biosolids analyses, and this is what they look like. And all I'm leading to is that, there is an opportunity here perhaps to begin to work on a pathway that would lead to an EPA-approved method. And I think that's really going to change the game for this particular research area, these technologies. I want to talk a little bit about water reuse and the importance of water reuse. This is something that I think is coming perhaps here in Texas, where we've had such scarcity issues. Maybe it's less of a new idea. But when you look at how much municipal effluent we have and how much water is reclaimed, it's a very, very small amount, and you can see that compared to other countries, you know, we have a ways to go. But along with that, there has to be an assurance, and one of the biggest issues that we have in the utilization of reclaimed water is it safe? Is there anything in there that is really going to cause illness? And you know, it goes to that irrigation water and these sorts of issues as well. So this is another issue, another area that I think that this particular area of research and science can contribute to, and especially in the context of direct potable reuse. That one is a high stakes sort of operation. Again, leading to analytical methods. EPA does have very, very prescriptive ways. So when you get to the point where you say it's an EPA approved method, it has been through a lot. And again, this particular area is not yet mainstream to that approved method status. And to get there, you know, we have to have methods developed. They have to be validated. There's a whole approval process that has to be published for the whole world to see. Then and only then are we going to have this benchmark and, I believe, broader application of these technologies. Now that becomes, I think, a little bit of an issue currently, because again, when I spoke about the criteria, again, we're talking about a number, and until we can get to a number, I think it's going to have to wait until that time, because you're really talking about these analytical methods in the context of numbers. And once we do that, there's additional openings, so to speak. So there's additional openings for alternative testing procedures and the like that are also very prescribed in the regulatory arena. So once we get these analytical methods, you know, the whole world will use them, and I think it will be worth a lot of thought and consideration about how this field can move to that point. And these are just the listings of the current methods, and you'll notice that they're basically all culture-based and very little of this type of new approach that we're talking about here. With regard to drinking water, again, there's opportunity here for improvement of public health status and prevention of disease state through better drinking water protection. I think BST has a significant relevance here, although I think most importantly, it is in the protection of sources and finding sources that are a threat to both ground and surface waters, and especially surface influenced groundwaters. So that to me is quite a way to do that. Again, for the Safe Drinking Water Act, wow, it's a very, very high set of bars. There's a lot of very, very legal type of procedures. For example, there's unregulated contaminants that are monitored, about 30 every 5 or 6 years or so. These get reported. There are candidate contaminants that are considered. There are regulatory determinations of those. And again, with the Drinking Water Act, you're really talking about a contaminant-specific type action, although we are moving into groups of contaminants, which may be an opportunity in this context with the new drinking water strategy. But again, it's a very, very, very prescriptive process, a very, very open and public type process. And at the end of the day, any regulatory determination that is positive has to meet the test that it has an adverse effect on people, that it is known to occur in water, And there is a meaningful opportunity for health risk reduction to people that are served by these very prescribed definition of public drinking water supply systems. And then there is a periodic review of this. So if we can think about this context, so if we want to move these methods and this science, this is the context that we would be moving into. And to think about that, I think it's quite challenging at the moment. But this is what we have to work with. And presently, these are the microorganisms that we have under regulation, under the Act, and others are being considered. But you can see there where we are as a country with regard to regulation of drinking water. I wanted to throw in Homeland Security and emergency response, and this is something that we just have responsibility for, and not necessarily a lot of regulatory or statutory type frameworks to work with. But in recent years, you know, and especially after we had microorganisms as a potential issue in the Homeland Security context after 9/11, and certainly in emergency situations such as hurricanes and the like, I think there is relevance, and it'd be important to know if we have a contamination event, if we have something that's real, and the like. So I did want to say that I do believe that it has relevance in that arena. We do have a couple of publications, I think, that can be accessed as part of this, so I would call these resource documents. These are available on the web, and one of them is the guide document itself. It's a bit dated now, but nevertheless, I think an important product of the agency, and also this manual that was put in place by our Region 10 folks on MST and TMDLs. So, you know, I can't get away without talking about this new hope, what I call the new hope, and that is the interest of the investment community in trying to make money from all of this. So I think a new facet of the business, of the water business, is can we make money from it? And I can tell you that entrepreneurs from all over the world are really getting very focused on this particular market, because they do see the convergence of a lot of people, a lot of contamination, water shortages and the like, and that they can make money. So they are gathering up their forces and bringing to bear on the marketplace a lot of new technologies, and technologies, for example, that might totally eliminate the way or completely change over the way we do wastewater treatment. And for us, this is a good thing, because if we can solve that problem in different ways, you know, we have the tools, but maybe we get to a more sustainable state. And, you know, of course, we have a piece here as researchers and others to get these ideas into the hands of these entrepreneurs. And this is a patent that from Dr. Shane, and it has been licensed out to a couple of laboratories, and there's more to come on that. But this is an example about how we move these ideas and these technologies into the private sector, and the agency has been supporting a lot of development for these new technologies through a program it calls the Small Business Innovative Research Program. And with that, that's it. I just want to thank Pam Barr and Oren and Jorge for all of their work, and, you know, here we go. Here we go. More to come.